Hi everybody, it's Alex again, and I've just noticed that that first agenda video for week one did successfully upload to YouTube, so that's good. It took a long time. Anyways, it worked, so I'm going to try to do another YouTube video for chapter one, and because it's going to be a sort of a short chapter. And then we'll move on to chapter two. And again, I don't know if I can do chapter two in YouTube or if I have to put chapter two in Collaborate because chapter two is longer than chapter one for sure. Anyways, we'll wait and see. Okay. So let's. That's good. That's good news because YouTube is actually better for you for some technical reasons than Collaborate. But anyways, okay. So. I think I forgot to mention in the agenda video that the textbooks that we use for microeconomics and in macroeconomics next term come from the same publisher. And the first three chapters in these two books are word for word identical. And so the way we've designed the program here at NLC is that we do chapters 1 through 3 in the micro course, and then when we come to macro next term, we don't repeat those chapters. We just start with chapter 4 instead. So the first three chapters in both textbooks contain quite a bit of sort of fundamental economic principles, and so chapter 1 is the first of these chapters of the introductory stuff. So all this stuff applies to both micro and macro. Anyways, and you'll also notice when you do the assignments on the publisher's website, there tend to be quite a few questions for the first few chapters. But again, although it's kind of a lot of work, it's all a good investment because it applies equally to micro and macro. So even though you're going to do a lot of work here in the first three chapters in the micro, it applies to both courses, and so that's useful. Okay, so in chapter 1 here, I like scribbling on these things. So. Good news for me is I like scribbling on them. The bad news for you is that I have bad handwriting. So anyways, okay, so what do we look at in chapter 1 here? So we see that economics is kind of based on this principle of scarcity and making economic decisions under the presence of scarcity, scarce resources, scarce income. Anyway, so we look at the concept of scarcity, and then we come up with a definition of economics, and we distinguish. The textbook only distinguishes two types of economics, micro and macro, but in fact, there's many more branches of economics. There's micro, there's macro, there's another one called econometrics, and there's another one called behavioral, and there's some other fancy ones that are sub-disciplines of these. Anyways, we'll look at these different types of economics, different branches of economics, I should say. Okay, where's my little thing here? This thing is a little bit... I have two screens, and the little dot doesn't correspond to the two. Okay, so in economics, we make economic decisions under the condition of scarcity, and resources are also allocated under some additional assumptions. One is that the agents in economics make so-called rational decisions, that decisions are made on the basis of marginal costs and marginal benefits, and the decisions are also influenced by parties responding to incentives. So we'll look at all that in chapter 1, and then we have three components of the scientific method that get applied to economics. One is economics, micro and macro in particular, make extensive use of theory. As we'll see, behavioral economics, another branch of economics, does not make use of so much theory. It makes use of more experiments. Anyways, micro and macro make extensive use of theory. Micro and macro make extensive use of this assumption called, I think the book pronounces it ceteris paribus. It means all else remaining the same. So when we're playing around with our economic models, we change the independent variable and to see the effect on the dependent variable. And these models have many, many variables in them. So when we change a variable, we just change one variable at a time to see the impact on the effect, as opposed to changing lots of the independent variables all at the same time. So ceteris paribus means all else remains the same, all else remains equal. We change one variable at a time. And the third scientific principle that gets applied in economics is that economics gets applied to observable phenomena, so-called empirical phenomena. So what that means is that economics is sort of a real life-based science. Even though it's a social science, it's a real life-based science as opposed to speculative versus a speculative endeavors. And sciences tend not to be based on speculation, but on observation. Okay, and then we draw a distinction between so-called positive and normative economics. In positive, the word positive in the world of science simply means descriptive. Descriptive. And the word normative, so positive, descriptive corresponds to what is, and normative corresponds to what ought to be. So normative economics corresponds to values, and positive economics corresponds to facts. That's the distinction. Positive means facts, normative means values, more or less. Okay, and then finally we very briefly look at some relationships between economics and government policies, socioeconomic goals. So we as citizens of Canada, or we as citizens of Alberta, we elect people to political office. We have certain social and economic goals. The government comes up with policies, and the policies are kind of based on economic theory to achieve these economic goals that the people are in favor of. Okay, so off we go to the concept of scarcity. So scarcity, it's just it's the concept that human wants exceed the supply of goods that can be produced in the economy, and our wants exceed the quantity of goods, the quantity of products that we want exceed the quantity of products that the economy can supply, because the resources that get used to produce those products are also in limited supply. That's the constraint. The resources have a limited supply. Okay, so limited supply so scarce resource supply leads to scarce finished product supply. And when we talk about products, now let's just. Okay, so if our economy has scarce resources that get used to produce products, if we have scarce resources, that means that when producers produce products, they have to make a choice. And likewise, consumers, when we consume goods, we have unlimited wants, but we have scarce resources with which we have scarce financial resources with which to buy products, and so we have to make decisions. And lots of economics is based on analyzing the kinds of decisions we make and what decisions we make based on these principles of scarcity. And the book points out that scarcity is not the same as poverty. We come to poverty a little bit we come to poverty a little bit later in the course. Poverty is meaning having insufficient income to afford the necessities of life. You don't have enough money to purchase food, clothing, and shelter. Whereas scarcity is present at all stratas of society, whether amongst the poor or even the affluent. Even the affluent have wants that exceed their resources. Yes, you can take 3 vacations in Mexico and Hawaii and Florida every year. So you're an affluent person because you can afford that. But you too are affected by scarcity, because if you had more resources, you would go on more vacations or longer vacations. So scarcity affects everybody in the economy, but poverty only affects some people. Okay. Oh, it's not working. Oh, because I'm clicking the wrong button. Oh, we'll get this figured out. Maybe. Okay. So when we speak of scarcity, scarcity corresponds to what we call products. So there's a good concept that I use all the time that you should adopt as well, because it's useful. And when we speak about products in economics, when we speak about products in marketing, we mean one of 2 things. We mean either goods or we mean services. So both goods and services can be products. When we speak of goods, goods mean something that's tangible. So that's tangible simply means something that we can see with our eyes and something we can touch with our fingers, our skin. And services are by definition, they're intangible. But when economists, so here's a next little glitch in technology. Like, why the heck isn't my mouse working properly? But anyways, it'll happen all the time. Anyway, so services are intangible, goods are tangible. Both of them are classified as products. And I tend to use the word products rather than goods and services. It's just more efficient. It just makes a lot of sense, especially from the perspective of economics. Maybe not so much in marketing, but in economics, I usually just talk about products. I do the same in marketing as well, but anyways. Okay. So when we talk about resources, another name for resources is inputs. Another name for resources in economics is factors of production. Factors of production. These terms are synonymous. They all mean the same thing. In economics, resources, inputs, factors of production, whatever, it's all the same stuff. Okay, then another kind of basic piece of terminology here is we convert resources into products. How do we convert? What's the process called? Well, the process of converting resources into products is called production. This is a definition. Production. The definition of production is any activity that converts resources into goods and services, into products. So we have resources. We have this. Should have gone like this. We have this transformative process. And then we have products. So we have inputs that get transformed into outputs. Products, outputs, whatever. It's all the same stuff. Okay. Okay, and so this is a little bit counterintuitive, because this language is not the language that we use in ordinary life. Because in ordinary life, we can understand producing a good out of a raw material. I build a house, so I use some wood, I use some wire, I use some glass, I use some shingles. Those are my inputs, and then the output is a house. The house is a good. We can all understand the production process for goods. Services is a little bit counterintuitive, but we also, in economics, we speak about producing services. So again, we take some inputs, we take some people, we take some time, and we take some economic inputs, and we produce a service. So, for example, usually in class, if this is a live class, I would be asking students for some live examples instead of just listening to me drone on. But anyways, I can't ask you questions directly, so we're going to have to do. I'm just going to have to give you an example. So, for example, you go on you fly down to Calgary from Edmonton, from the Edmonton airport. You grab a WestJet flight, and so the transportation service that WestJet provides. That's an economic product. The flight is intangible. You can't put your finger on the flight. You can't put the flight in your pocket the way you can a book or your wallet or something, the way you can goods. Okay, so you want to buy a house, so you go to a real estate agent. The real estate agent hooks you up. You're the house buyer. The real estate agent hooks you up with a house seller. That service that the real estate agent provides you is a service that is a product in the eyes of economics. You own a house now and you're afraid that it's going to burn down, so you buy some insurance on it. The insurance that you purchase is a service. And a service, insurance, the insurance is a service, and the insurance product, the insurance is a product in the eyes of economics. Even though it's intangible, it's a service. And then we have some things in the economy that are kind of a combination, good, service combined. So for example, you go to a restaurant, you buy a meal, the waitress or waiter brings you a plate that's got some food on it. The food is obviously a good, it's something tangible. But when you go to the restaurant, you also participate in some of the intangible services. You know, you're buying the friendly service, you're buying the atmosphere, you're buying the music and all that kind of stuff. And the atmosphere, the friendly service, the music, those are intangible. Those are services, but they're part of the whole package of the single product that you buy at the restaurant. So the restaurant sells you a product that has both good features and service features combined. That's an economic product. Okay, and I think intuitively you probably know all that kind of stuff, but what the heck. We're trying to get you up to speed on some of the language. My little mouse here is lost. We're just trying to get you up to speed on some of the language that we use in economics all the time. Okay, so we spoke about the production process in economics converts inputs into outputs. It converts resources into products. So we draw this little table in economics. The way I like to do it, I like to do it like this. We have resources in one column. We can call them resources. We can call them inputs, resources, and we have these returns to resources. So, you know, economics, the science of economics, the social science of economics has been around for about almost 250 years, not quite. Effectively, we'll get to this in a little bit here, but effectively modern economics started in 1776 with a Scottish writer by the name of Adam Smith. And we'll come back to Adam Smith in a bit here. So it's been around for about 250 years. People have studied economics. If you go back a couple thousand years to the ancient Greeks, they certainly have observations on the nature of the Greek economy a couple of thousand years ago. But modern economics as a science, economics as a social science, effectively started in 1776. And so that's a couple hundred years ago. And things change. Things have changed in economics. Economics has become much more scientific over the last couple centuries. So when I speak about classical economics, I mean economics that goes back to the time of Adam Smith. And in classical economics, there are four. Remember, we said resources, factors of production, la-di-da-di-da. In classical economics, factors of production. Abbreviation. So in classical economics, there are four factors of production. It's land, labor, capital, and we have to explain what this stuff means because, you know, capital, these words don't necessarily mean what you think it means. Anyways, land, labor, capital, and then the fourth one is, I call it risk taking. That's kind of my background. I call it risk taking. The book calls it entrepreneurial. The book calls it entrepreneurialism, which is okay. And then there's some other ones. So, for example, the slide here talks about human capital. Well, in classical economics, human capital gets classified as part of labor. And then there's another factor of production. I think we come to it in macro course rather than micro. I can't remember. I have both courses this term, so I'm kind of getting mixed up at the moment. There's another factor of production in modern economics, modern versus classical versus modern. There's another factor of production in modern economics called technology. But we're going to just skip over that one for the time being. But anyways, when we talk about factors of production, when we talk about these economic inputs, when we talk about resources, we have these returns to these factors of production. In the classical, okay, I guess I should explain what these things actually mean. So land, in classical economics, I think this concept actually comes not from Adam Smith. It comes from another British economist by the name of David Ricardo. When he talked about land, it means he was actually talking about an agricultural-based society. So when he talked about land, he means dirt, and he meant, so it means dirt. It means dirt. It means the thing, and he actually talked about agricultural land. So he really meant fields. But of course, it means other stuff on land. So like water, if you have a water supply, that's part of, and you have air. Air is an economic factor of production for sure. We don't really think about it, but anyways, so it's things that come from nature, natural things, fields, land, area. Oh, and I just screwed up my little thing here. Okay, and then labor, of course, means human labor. So, of course, a couple hundred years ago, people were less technologically sophisticated than we are today. And, of course, in a couple hundred years, people will be more technologically sophisticated than we are today as well. But traditionally, labor meant physical kind of labor. It really meant physical labor. And now when we talk about capital, what we mean is physical capital. And when we say physical, we mean tangible stuff. So it means buildings. And the equipment inside buildings that we use to produce goods. You know, I want to buy a meal at a restaurant, so there's a bunch of kitchen equipment in the back. There's a stove, there's a fridge, there's slicers and dicers and all that kind of stuff. That's equipment, and it's inside the building, so the restaurant is kind of like a factory. When you speak about capital in economics, we mean physical capital. So capital is not money. It's not money. It's not money. It is not financial capital. Financial capital, it's kind of a different kettle of fish. We're not going to talk about that in this class. You can talk about financial capital in accounting class. We might talk. We're not going to talk. We might talk a little bit more in macro than in micro, but it does not mean money. It's not your bank account. It means tangible buildings and the equipment inside them. Okay, and then entrepreneurialism. Well, the entrepreneurialism, the risk taking. It's the glue. It's the magic that pulls all these other things together. It's the entrepreneur, the business owner, that says, "Hey, I see an opportunity, so I'm going to get some land. I'm going to get some workers. I'm going to bring in some equipment, and I'm going to put them all together, invest my money, and see if I can make a buck at it." It's the risk taking. So in classical economics, we have these. For each one of these four factors of production, because this is the four classical factors of, that's a two. We have these four returns to these factors of production. And the return to land in classical economics is known as rent. The name of the return to labor in classical economics is known as wages. And when we speak about wages, we mean any return to somebody selling their time to an employer. So whether you call it wages, whether you call it salary, whether you call it commission, whatever, it's all wages. Those are all classified as wages. And the return to capital anyways, in classical economics, it's known as interest. And this is a different concept of interest than you will study in accounting and finance. It's not, normally in the world of finance, interest means the interest on a loan. I borrow money from the bank, I pay the bank interest. That's not what they're talking about here. That's not what economists talk about. They just mean that any return to capital, whether you own the piece of equipment or you borrow it and you get some kind of economic return to it, it's called interest. It's kind of a slightly different meaning of the word interest than we normally mean. And the fourth return to the fourth factor of production, the factor of production is risk-taking or entrepreneurialism, and the return in classical economics is called profit. Anyways, this is just some basic terminology that we will come back to later in the course, but I just want to give you a heads up on it now. Okay, so factors of production, off we go. Okay, so now this is an introductory course. This is chapter 1. I have to kind of remember it's just chapter 1, and we got lots of time to bring up to speed and other stuff. Okay, so what the heck is economics? I mean, if you want to give economics a definition, what is it? So these authors define economics. It's a social science that studies how people allocate their limited resources to satisfy their unlimited wants. Remember we talked about the concept of scarcity way back in a couple slides ago? I can't spell. Scarcity. So we have scarce resources. So, you own some land, you own some labor, you own some capital, and you have all of those things in limited supply. So those are the factors of production. How do we decide how to allocate those resources to produce products? Why do we want to produce products? Because it's products that satisfy our human wants. You need food, you need shelter, you need clothing, you need entertainment, la-di-da-di-da. We have all these wants correspond to products, and the resources, the inputs, produce the outputs. We have to have ways to allocate our resources to produce which goods, which products, and in what quantity. That's what economics studies. So economics studies the allocation of limited resources under the condition of scarcity to satisfy our unlimited wants. And when we speak about unlimited, we don't necessarily mean any particular person. We're talking about society as a whole. Okay, so the book only draws the distinction between two branches of economics, micro and macro. I'm going to bring 4 fields of economics to your attention, and each of these 4 fields, they have a number of sub-disciplines that we're not going to get into, but economics, because it's been around for a couple hundred years, has lots and lots of branches and sub-branches, and so there's many different branches we can branch off into. Anyways, so microeconomics deals with the study of individual in firms. So we kind of draw this distinction. We often don't talk about individual people so much in microeconomics. We really talk about households. Households are sort of the owner of the resources. Yes, a household might only have one person in it, but a household is usually made up of a family. So you might have a husband and wife and a bunch of children, and that comprises a household rather than just an individual. Anyways, so households make decisions, and likewise, companies. In the field of economics likes to use the word firm. Whereas in other subjects, in marketing or in accounting, you're probably going to talk about companies, or businesses, it all means the same thing. It all means firm, company, businesses. Economics is settled on the word firm. I don't really like it myself. I'd rather speak of companies, but what the heck. Economics is a distinct discipline, and they have some distinct terminology, and they do some things some different ways than in other fields. So since this is economics, we're going to have to use, we're stuck with the word firm. But anyways, firm, business, company, all the same stuff. Okay, so microeconomics studies the decisions made by households in allocating resources, in selling the resources, and in making purchase decisions, because the households, they own the resources that they sell to businesses. The businesses in turn take those resources and produce products, and the households in turn buy those products from the businesses. They buy those products from the firms. Okay, so micro looks at households and its decision making, and macro looks at the economy as a whole. So the macro simply means large scale. It looks at the so-called big picture, and if you're taking macroeconomics next term, which I believe most of you are, macro looks at three big things. We'll come back to what macro is in a bit here, but in chapter 2. But macroeconomics looks at so-called national income. So the basic definition of national income that we're going to use in macro next term is gross, that's a G, gross domestic product, GDP. And we look at how GDP is created, and part of GDP, we take these factors of production. We have these 4 factors of production: land, labor, capital, and risk-taking or entrepreneurialism. The major factor of production in the economy is labor. Labor is the big dog in the economy. We always want to know what's happening with labor. And if we have labor that's not being used, well, sometimes it gets classified as unemployment. And because labor is a significant component in the most significant resource in the economy, we're concerned about when unemployment gets too high. And then another thing that macro looks at is the inflation rate. There's kind of an optimal level of inflation in the economy. Likewise, there's an optimal level of unemployment in the economy, and we will get to all of that either in this course or in macroeconomics next term. So I said there's 4 big branches of economics. We have micro, we have macro we do next term. There's 2 other major branches of economics. There's a third one called econometrics. And really what econometrics is, it's the use of statistics. It's the use of statistics. It's the statistical analysis of economic phenomena. So whether we're looking at the GDP, or we're looking at how firms operate, and we're using a lot of statistics, lots of numbers, that's called econometrics. But we don't do econometrics in this course and next course. And there's a 4th branch of economics that I'm going to bring to your attention, because most people, especially if you've studied any economics at all, and most of you probably have not, but there's another branch of economics called behavioral economics. And what behavioral economics is, well, so I'm just going to give you a brief explanation. Behavioral economics is a modern branch of economics. It's only been around for, I think it's only been around for about 35 to 40 years, as opposed to micro and macro, which have been around for over a couple hundred years. And behavioral economics is really the application of psychology. I should put my pen away here, because I have bad handwriting. Psychology. It's the application of psychology to microeconomics. So when behavioral economics looks at decision making, it looks at the economic decision making kind of from a psychological perspective. So there's another difference between, I'm kind of bringing this to your attention because most people find behavioral economics, even though you might find micro boring and you might find macro boring, most people find behavioral economics actually quite fascinating, especially if you've studied a little bit of micro and macro and you know some of the principles. But anyways, micro and macro are micro and macro, M&M, they're classical economics. And they're heavily based on theory. Behavioral economics is a branch of modern economics, and it's not based on theory, it's based on experiments. So, and this is why some people find behavioral economics so interesting, because, you know, theory can be kind of tedious and boring and hard to understand at sometimes, but most people can kind of understand how these experiments work. Anyways, we'll come back, I think in chapter 4 or maybe chapter 7, we look at some examples of behavioral economics to help you understand the distinction between these two and to show you a different way of looking at economics. Okay, and then what you also wanted to say was that micro and macro, they started a couple hundred years ago. They really started with kind of the founding father of economics, a fellow by the name of Adam Smith. And so I've got a portrait here of Adam Smith. Just hold on a second here. I got a little portrait here of Adam Smith. Oh, there's Adam Smith right there. So here's Adam Smith. He was a Scottish philosopher, actually. And the Bible, the original Bible, if I can call it that, I hope no one's offended, the original book that kind of founded modern economics is called The Wealth of Nations. And it was published by Adam Smith in 1776. So we all know a little bit of history, and I'm sure most of you know that the other key event in the year 1776 was the U.S. War of Independence. The United States was formerly a colony of Britain, and they succeeded in breaking away from Britain as a colony, and they became an independent country in the War of 1776. And by coincidentally, that's the same year that Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations. Anyways, we'll come back to The Wealth of Nations a little bit later. Anyways, that's our patron saint of economics, classical economics, Adam Smith. Okay, so in economics we study economic decision making under the presence of scarcity, of scarce resources, and there's a bunch of other assumptions that are employed by economics, micro and macro, not so much in behavioral. Behavioral's got a different approach, but anyways, one of the assumptions of microeconomics is that one of the assumptions of economics is that when people make decisions, whether it's the individual household making a decision to sell resources or to buy products, or it's companies making decisions to buy resources from the households, the assumption is that people make decisions on the basis of furthering their self-interest. And so this is the so-called rationality assumption, that we know what is best for us and that our decisions reflect that self-interest. Now that is an assumption. Is it true? It's a different question. And in fact, if you were interested in behavioral economics is based on a different assumption. Behavioral economics is based on an assumption that people are irrational and that our decisions are not based on self-interest, but they're based on other quirky things. But anyways, in classical economics, we have this rationality assumption in that individual agents know what's in their self-interest and they make their decisions to serve their self-interest. Anyways, so we do not intentionally make decisions that will leave us worse off. That's exactly the opposite decision That's the exact opposite assumption that behavioral economics makes, but that's the assumption of in microeconomics, at least in microeconomics. Okay, so another key principle of economics, and we'll run into this all the time in economics. These are key principles. We have this concept of opportunity cost. So opportunity cost really means when we make a decision, and so a decision means we have options. So we have option A, we have option B, maybe we have option C, and maybe we have an option D. But when we choose one of these options and we make a decision, when we choose one thing, it means we're not choosing something else. We're choosing B. We're in favor of B because we're against A, C, and D. And what this implies is that when we select one option, I'm starving here, anyways. There's a cost involved. Even if we chose option A, C, or D, there are benefits associated with these other options, but when we choose option B, we're foregoing the benefits of these other options. And that's what the concept of our opportunity cost means. When we're choosing one thing, we're foregoing the benefits associated with the other options. So opportunity cost means we choose between alternative options, and these different options have different benefits. So when we choose one thing, we're not choosing something else. Anyways, we'll come back to that again in the course. It's a fundamental concept of economics, and so we'll come back to it later. I'm so many little technical problems today with the technology that I came in about 3 hours ago, and I'm starving, and my stomach is starting to growl, and so I'm starting to fade here a little bit. Anyways, fortunately, we're quite close to the end of chapter 1, so I'll top it out, and then I'll take a break, and then we'll come back to chapter 2. Okay, so another key assumption of economics, and I have to admit I don't quite like the way the author words this. It says decisions are made on the margin. So when we're talking about the decisions here, we're talking about the decisions made by households selling factors of production to businesses, or we're talking about the businesses themselves, the firms making decisions to buy resources from the households, or we're talking about consumers making decisions between different alternatives. It says decisions are made at the margin. So I have to explain something here. In economics, this is a key point of economics. In economics, the word marginal sorry, spelling mistake there, means incremental. Or additional. Or extra. That's the only thing it means in the world of economics. You may think that in ordinary life we think the word marginal has another meaning, and it does have other meanings in other fields. But we're in economics. We talk about people living on the margins of society. We talk about iffy kind of things. But in economics, the word marginal means incremental or additional or extra. That's all it means, and there's lots and lots of math behind this, and we'll come to this, so don't worry about it. We will come to it, but it means the marginal means incremental. So when the authors say decisions are made on the margin, what it means is decisions are made on the basis of made on the basis of increments. That's what increments. That's what the author's talking about. And so in economics, we have two broad classes of marginal things. We have marginal benefits and we have marginal costs. And we're going to use these concepts of marginal costs and marginal benefits lots of times in this course. And there's lots of different flavors of marginal benefits and costs. These are just general classes. And another thing that I just want to point out here, when we're calculating, and we'll get into these calculations in a minute. We're going to do an example here in a minute of calculating some marginal costs. When we're calculating the marginal cost, remember it means incremental or additional. And what that means is in accounting and in economics, we often make reference to so-called sunk costs. Sunk costs. And what sunk costs are, they're previously incurred costs. Why am I bringing this to your attention? Because when we're calculating marginal costs, we do not factor in sunk costs. Decisions that have been made in the past, expenses that we have incurred in the past, they're not incremental, they're historical, and sunk are historical. But when we're making economic decisions, we're looking towards the future. We're looking towards extra costs, new costs, not historical and not sunk. Okay. So I'm going to bring something to your attention. I'm going to bring something to your attention, and you don't have to memorize or anything. It's just something to put in the back of your mind, because we're going to come back to this later in the course. So we're saying that when economists make decisions, when we look at people and their economic behavior, they make decisions based on marginal costs and marginal benefits. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of these kind of decisions in the textbook. So we'll come back to, obviously we'll come back to these later in the book, but I just want to give you a heads up. So the first example is when we get into chapters, I think it's 8, 9, 10, and 11, and we look at these different types of industries. There's 4 types of industries that we look at in micro. We look at monopoly. I shouldn't have done that. Anyway, monopoly. We look at perfectly competitive. We look at something called monopolistic competition. I should see if I can type. Can I actually type? Sorry, you're stuck with my bad handwriting. Look at the monopolistic competition. And then there's a 4th class of industries known as oligopoly. Anyways, we'll come back to all this in later chapters, so don't worry about it. But what I'm giving you a heads up about is when we look at these different kinds of industries, and we want to know what's the optimal level of output that these companies should produce, what's the optimal level of output that a monopolist should produce, what's the optimal level of output of a perfectly competitive company or a monopolistic competitive company. The optimal level of output is where marginal revenue, which is a benefit, equals marginal cost. This formula, I'm giving you the answer to a whole bunch of exam questions here. The optimal level of output for these 3 types of industries, monopoly, perfect competition, and monopolistic competition, it's the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That rule, it only applies to these 3 types of industries. It does not apply to oligopoly, and we'll understand why when we get to oligopoly. Anyways, I'm just giving you a heads up. Here's an example of the economic application of decisions being made using marginal cost and marginal benefit, and the rule is optimal level of output is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So that's one example. So I'm going to give you another example. That's example number 1. Example number 2. So so we have these companies, and companies want to produce some product, some finished product, so they have to hire the factors of production, they have to have some land, they have to have some capital, they have to have some labor. So when they're talking about hiring labor, you have labor is people. Labor. So the optimal level of labor, of workers that a company should employ, is at the point where the marginal revenue from producing one more unit of production. So when a company hires one more employee, that extra employee produces extra output. And so there's a certain level of output associated with that extra hiring, and there's a certain level of revenue associated with that extra level of output. So the optimal level of labor that a business should hire is at the point where the marginal revenue from that extra production exactly equals the marginal cost of hiring that extra person. So again, company decides on the optimal level of a resource to employ where the marginal revenue from the extra level of output produced by that extra person equals the cost of hiring that extra person. That's example number 2. And I know you don't really, you're not kind of getting any of this at this moment, but that doesn't matter. I'm just bringing to your attention some examples of situations in economics where decisions are made on the basis of marginal cost and marginal revenues. And then the third example I'm going to bring to your attention, and this is an area where economics, gets a little bit interesting for some people. But economists analyze all sorts of social phenomena. So one, and you'll see this in the course. One thing that economists study is they'll study crime. There'll be an economic analysis of crime, or there'll be an economic analysis of pollution. So I'm going to use pollution because it's kind of easy for me to explain, and it's easier for you to envisage. So we all agree that if we have pollution in society, there's costs associated with pollution. If we have a lot of air pollution, people get sick and they miss work, they have to go to the hospital, have to take medication, all that kind of stuff. There's certainly costs associated with a certain level of pollution. So if we start spending money on so there's benefits associated with lower levels of pollution. But if we want to reduce pollution, we're also going to have to incur costs. We're going to have to invest more money in filters. We're going to have to put more money in more efficient machinery that doesn't produce pollution when it's manufacturing. And so there's costs associated with reducing pollution. And so the pollution abatement equipment has costs associated with it, and the reduction in the pollution has benefits associated with it. And so at the end of the day, we say there's an optimal level of pollution in society. There's an optimal level of crime in society. And the optimal level is at the point where the benefits from reduced pollution or reduced crime exactly equal the incremental cost. Reducing pollution, reducing crime results in incremental benefits to society, and the initiatives to reduce those costs, those initiatives to reduce pollution, to reduce crime, also has a cost. And so the optimal level of pollution in society is where the optimal benefits from the reduction in pollution exactly equal the marginal cost of controlling the pollution. Anyways, we'll come back to this in some other chapters, but it's simply another example of decision making in society that's based on the concept of the marginal cost equaling marginal benefit. Okay. So let's just keep on going here. This is just introductory stuff. I have to kind of remember that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so another assumption, another sub-assumption that agents in the economy make rational decisions is that the agents in the economy respond to incentives. So and there's two kinds of incentives. There are rewards, and there are rewards, and two, there are punishments. So if the government wants to encourage certain kind of economic action, they can give rewards. They want people to reduce their carbon footprint, so the government can give tax credits to people to buy more fuel-efficient cars, and they can also inflict punishments on people to reduce certain kinds of economic activity. If they think that we're causing too much pollution with our vehicles because we're driving too many kilometers, then they can put a tax on gasoline to increase the cost to consumers, so we can't afford to buy as much gasoline, and then we end up driving less and we end up polluting less. Anyways, the assumption is that agents in the economic system respond to incentives, whether those are incentives or rewards or punishments. And and so the incentives. Okay, I think that's all I'm going to mention there, except this last part here is that self-interest is not necessarily measured only in dollar terms. And so the best example of this, and I think the book actually mentions it on page 9 of the book. On page 9 of the book talks about people acting on the basis of altruism. And so sometimes people do things for the benefit of other people, rather than simply self-interest. So I'm walking down the street and I see a little old lady trying to get across the street. I'm in a rush, I need to get someplace. And I see a little old lady having problems pushing the button to hit the crosswalk kind of thing. So I go out of my way, push the button, walk the little old lady across the street, get to the other side, and then I'm late for my meeting. But anyways, I rush off. So when we talked about Adam Smith before being the father of modern economics, Adam Smith, and we talked about economic decisions being based on self-interest. So Adam Smith, although he was the father of capitalism, of modern economics, Adam Smith was a philosopher at one of the universities in Scotland. He's a philosopher of moral philosophy. He was not a professor of economics. He was a philosophy professor, not an economics professor. And he wrote a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And in his book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, he analyzed altruism down to self-interest. So he said that sometimes we do things that don't seem to be in our particular self-interest, but he said even though things don't always look to be in our self-interest, they in fact are in our self-interest. And he said that that's because we have this capacity for sympathy with other people. So when I see this little lady struggling to get across the street, although it's in my self-interest to ignore her and get off to my meeting so I'm not late, I also sympathize with other people. And I can drive self-interest from sympathizing with other people. So here my self-interest in sympathizing with this other person struggling with this problem that I can help her with overrides my immediate self-interest to get to my meeting on time. Even though I end up being late for my meeting, and that's kind of counter to my self-interest, Adam Smith would say, I drive greater self-interest by helping another person in this kind of situation. And so even Adam Smith reduced altruistic activities down to self-interest. And so we're kind of back to our point that Even though acting self-interestedly might not be boiled down to dollars and cents, it still encompasses altruism, or acting for the best interest of other people rather than herself. Adam Smith says that's still self-interest. Anyways, okay, let's just keep on going here. Okay, so this next little section talks, we have two more little sections here, then we'll be done, then I'll take a break. So the next little section is, we mentioned before that economics, or at least micro and macro, those are social sciences. And so they're founded on the so-called scientific method. And there are three components of the scientific method that that economics use. One is that these fields, the fields of economics, are extensively based on theories, and another name for theories is models. So this is a big assumption. Because when we talk about models or theories, we're trying to describe some phenomena that we observe in society, and the phenomena is quite complicated. And so what we do is we come up with a theory that simplifies reality. So we draw a model that has a couple of straight lines as opposed to the real phenomena, which is a bunch of squiggly lines. But what this means is that the theory or the model, it only represents certain aspects of reality. Reality is quite complex, and the model is quite simple. But reality is just too complicated for us to understand on its own. So what we do is we devise these models to kind of explain certain features of reality, and that means that we ignore some other aspects. But anyways, that's the way science works. We come up with these models, explain a few things, and we ignore some other stuff. And the best example of this is in the book. We see a street map. We know that when I look at a street, when I'm actually in Edmonton, the streets kind of go this way. Some streets are straight, and other ones kind of go squiggly like this. But when we look at the actual map, the map, it's on a 1 to 40,000 scale, and so the map kind of simplifies things. Everything's on a kind of a straight line in the map. You might have a gradual curving road like this kind of thing, but in actual fact, the roads are quite have quite different shapes. So this analogy of a map with a theory, I think, is a good one. Where's my little thing here? Oh, this is going to drive me crazy. The map simplifies the actual street pattern. Likewise, in economics, we use these models or theories that simplify reality in order to make certain aspects of it explainable. And so what this kind of also means is that because the model or the theory are simplifications of reality, what it also means is that we often can find some counterexamples that don't fit the theory. But the mere fact that our model does not describe 100% of things, it doesn't describe everything, even though the model's not perfect, the model can still be useful. Models don't have to be perfect in order to be useful. And we see this all the time in accounting and finance. We have financial statements, we do budgets, we have these models of our businesses. They're never perfect. Like they're always wrong. But the mere fact that they're always wrong does not mean that they are not useful. They are useful. Even if they explain only 75% of what we do, 75% or 80%, hey, that's better than 5%. So theories and models are useful, even though they're not perfect descriptions of the world as we find it. Okay, so the second major assumption, second aspect of the scientific method that we use in economics extensively, we use this assumption. Now, so it's a Latin word, right? It's Latin, and I have to admit, we don't use Latin anymore. Latin's a dead language, but we certainly have lots and lots of Latin concepts in law, for example, lots in medicine. And we use one of these concepts in economics, and the term we use, the book pronounces ceteris paribus. Now, what ceteris paribus means, it's an assumption that nothing changes except the factor being studied. So in our economic model, let's say in our economic model, let's say we have 6 factors. Let's go back to our factors of production. So let's say in classical economics we have 4 factors of production. I wonder if I have an eraser here. Oh, I do. Maybe I can erase some of the stuff. Okay, let me try it again. So let's go back to our factors of production. We have land, labor, capital, and we have entrepreneurialism. And so we want to change these variables and see what the effect is on output. So when economists play around with their models, they'll change just one of these factors at a time. So we'll increase actually that's a bad example. Let me use labor, because anyway, labor is easier to use. It's more intuitive. So we want to increase our output in our company. So I'm going to hire 1 more employee. And then we're going to see what the effect of hiring 1 more employee is on our output. And then we're going to hire 1 more employee. So 1 employee, an extra, then we have 2, and then we see what the effect of that hiring that extra employee is on output. But when we change this variable of labor, we leave the amount of capital the same, we leave the amount of land the same, and we leave the amount of entrepreneurialism the same, even though entrepreneurialism is very difficult to measure. But theoretically, we can. So when we play around with just one variable at a time and we leave all the other variables the same, all the other independent variables the same, and we look at the effect on the output, we're making use of this ceteris paribus assumption. We tinker with one variable at a time and we leave all the others unchanged at the same during the same experiment. And then we'll leave labor alone, and then we'll change the amount of capital. We'll leave all the labor alone, and then we'll bring in extra pieces of equipment and see how output changes then. But again, we change one variable at a time. Anyways, in economics, we use this assumption all the time. That's not the way things work in the real world. In the real world, in any real business, these well, I shouldn't say in any, but often these variables, we hire extra workers for sure, but it's because we also buy extra equipment at the same time, and maybe we also have to expand our building all at the same time. So we tinker around with 3 variables all at the same time. But in economics, we just play with them one by one. Anyways, okay. So the third assumption that we make in as part of the scientific method as it's applied to economics is that economics is a so-called empirical science, and again, it kind of comes back to, actually it's the next part. Anyways, it comes to the next part. It's an empirical science, and that means it's based on observable things. So we can see how many people are unemployed. We can, when we're looking at equipment in our factories, we have a certain capacity utilization. I've got a ski hill, but we only have snow for 4 months of the year, so it gets used 4 months of the year, and it's unused 8 months of the year. We can measure that. If we get extra snowfall one year, maybe our ski season ends up being 5 months long, and the down season is 5 and 7 months long. So we can measure the impact of changes in snowfall on our capacity utilization at the ski hill. Or we're looking at the unemployment rate. When too many people get unemployed, we have fewer people buying stuff in society, demand for products decreases, that has an effect on prices. We're talking about unemployment, we're talking about prices, we're talking about inflation. These are all observable things in the economy. And so economics studies observable things and that means economics is an empirical science. So when we're talking about sciences, we have two branches of sciences. We have empirical and we have non-empirical. And when we're talking about empirical, we have natural sciences. So we have things like chemistry. We have things like physics. And then we have social sciences. So we have things like economics, psychology, PSY. We have sociology. Anyways, we have these social sciences. And then we talk about non-empirical sciences. We have things like math. We have things like logic. We have things like statistics. There's a science of statistics. Anyways, so when we're talking about economics, it's an empirical science, and it's based on observable things. That's what empirical means. Things that we can see. Okay, next slide. I'm just going to skip it. It's the economic model of crime. But I already talked to you a little bit about crime before. And we'll come back to this. We'll come back to that later in the course. Okay, so the final little section of chapter 1 here, and then we'll call it a break, and then I'll start a new video for chapter 2, or go to Collaborate. So we draw this distinction in economics between so-called positive economics versus normative economics. And I mentioned earlier, the word positive means descriptive. And so it corresponds to facts. What's the unemployment rate in Canada right now? Well, it's 6.8%. Why is it 6.8%? Because Statistics Canada goes out and does a survey across the country in all the big cities every month, and they say that it's 6%. They observe it, saying that the unemployment rate in Canada is 6.8%. That is a fact. That's part of positive economics. What's the inflation rate in Canada in September 2015? It's 1. Well, what is it in August? Because it's still August. It's 1.2% or whatever the heck it is. Why is it 1.2%? Because Statistics Canada does surveys across the country of the cost of price changes in all the big cities across the country, and Statistics Canada comes back and describes the rate of inflation at 1.2%. That's a description. It's a fact. It's something that's observed. That's part of positive economics. Normative economics is based on values. It's based on values. So the government of Canada says, yes, the unemployment rate in Canada is currently 6.8%, but it's too high. The government of Canada wants to have an unemployment rate of 5.0%. So they say that the unemployment rate should be, or it ought to be, oh geez, my freaking phone, to be, I'm going to ignore it. Sorry, I'm actually going to take it. Hi, Susan, I wonder if we can turn this off. Yeah, hi. I'm recording. I'll come over to see you in about 2 minutes. Okay. Wait, I just want to take that because it's my, anyways. Okay, so the government of Canada says, hey, yes, the unemployment rate is currently 6.8%, but it should be only 5%, and therefore the government's going to adopt economic policies to reduce the rate of unemployment. When the government says what the unemployment rate should be, that's part of normative economics. That's reflecting the values, the social values of the government of today. And of course, we have an election going on. The Conservatives want an unemployment rate of 5%. The NDP wants 4.5%. Liberals want 4.7%. Anyways. So when we're talking about economics and we're making using sentences, we have to draw a distinction between facts versus values. Anyway, so when we talk about politics, politicians, and economists often try to prescribe solutions to economic problems. When they prescribe solutions to economic problems, they're venturing into the realm of normative economics. It's just a basic classification. 99% of the stuff that we're going to do in this class is all going to be positive economics. It's going to be descriptive. And we'll do a little bit of normative, but not very much. Okay, and this kind of ties into my into the final slide. I think this is the final slide. Oh, it's almost the final slide. Is we talk about politics and we talk about the political economy, which kind of means that economic policies tie into government policies, and they tie into policies of different political parties. And so the governments of the day, whether it's mostly at the federal level, but it can also be at the provincial level, the governments have certain goals that they want to see. They want to have so-called full employment. What that means we'll come to shortly. They want to have an economy that's productively efficient and allocatively efficient. They want to see economic growth. They want to have price stability, which means low inflation. They want to see that the economic wealth in society has some kind of equitable distribution across our economic classes. They do not want to see a high disparity between ultra wealthy and the very poor. They kind of like to have a big middle class. So the government has certain economic goals, and in order to achieve those goals, the government has to come up with plans. And those economic plans of governments are known as economic policies. It's really based on normative economics, because the government comes up with policies to achieve these goals. Anyways, when we get into government, the realm of government and the economy, normative and descriptive economics all kind of starts blending together. We have the factual description, which is positive economics. We identify problems, and then the normative economics comes up with solutions to these problems. Anyways, later in the course, we'll get into government policy and the application of economics to it. Okay, so that's it for chapter 1. I'm going to take a break, and then we'll come back and do chapter 2. I'm going to, hopefully this recording will load in YouTube, and I can do the second chapter also in YouTube. There's an advantage in using YouTube over Collaborate, but if it doesn't work, I'm going to have to use Collaborate, and we'll have to figure out how to upload that for you. But anyways, the first one worked, the agenda worked, so I'm hoping that this chapter 1 will work as well. Okay, so that's it for chapter 1, and talk to you later. Oops, I guess I have to do this over here.